I've got 2 cents to pay, mister. Can you scare the bad guys that troubles Mom?
I've got 2 cents to pay. Can you scare the bad guys that troubles Mom? Most people pay me in blood. The ones who are desperate pay me in gold. But the most dangerous debt I ever recorded in my ledger was 2 copper coins from a girl who didn't know how to be afraid. The rain in Seoul doesn't wash away the sins of the city. It just makes the neon lights reflect off the blood on the pavement. I am Hyung. To the world, I am a logistics mogul. To the shadows, I am the chairman of the YLHWI syndicate. My life is a series of calculated moves, cold stares, and the heavy weight of a silenced pistol tucked against my ribs. I don't believe in fate, and I certainly don't believe in kindness. But that night, on the last train heading toward the Han River, the world stopped spinning on its axis. Across from me sat a woman with skin like mahogany and eyes full of a weariness I recognized, the look of someone who has been fighting a war with no soldiers. Beside her was a small girl, a crown of braids atop her head, holding a teddy bear like it was a shield. The girl looked at my tattoos, the ink crawling up my neck, the marks of a life spent in the dirt. She didn't flinch. She reached into a tiny, frayed pocket, pulled out 2 cents, and held them out to me with a hand that didn't shake. "I've got 2 cents to pay," she whispered, her voice a bell in the silence of the cabin. "Can you scare the bad guys that trouble Mom?" The mother, Rashiel, gasped, reaching for the child. But I didn't look at the mother. I looked at those 2 coins. In that moment, the chairman of the YLHWI didn't see a child. He saw a contract that would change the soul of the city forever. Hello, viewers. Welcome to the family. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments so I can send you special regards. Now let's go deep into the story. The subway car hummed, a low-frequency vibration that rattled the windows against the backdrop of the Seoul skyline. Hyung didn't move. His hand, etched with the blackened ink of a dragon's tail, remained resting on his knee. He was used to being stared at, but usually those stares were filled with the sour scent of fear or the sharp edge of resentment. The little girl Maya took a step forward. Her white lace dress was spotless, a stark contrast to the grime of the late-night commute. She held the 2 coins out, her palms small and flat. "Maya, no," Rashiel whispered, her voice a mix of exhaustion and terror. She grabbed Maya's shoulder, pulling her back. Rashiel's eyes met Hyung for a split second. She saw the tailored suit, the razor-sharp haircut, and the man standing behind him, a silent shadow in a black coat named Diho. She knew exactly what kind of man Hyung was. You didn't live in the outskirts of the district without learning how to spot a predator. Hyung leaned forward. The movement was slow, deliberate, like a predator deciding whether to strike or observe. 2 cents, he said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate in the girl's chest. "That is a very specific price, little one." "It's all I have in my bank," Maya said, nodding toward her small plastic piggy bank peeking out of her mother's tote bag. "The men in the gray suits come to the house. They make Mom cry. They take the papers and say we have to go. They are bad. You look like you can scare them." Diho, standing behind Hyung, shifted uncomfortably. He expected the chairman to dismiss them, perhaps even offer a dry, cruel laugh. Instead, Hyung reached out. His large, tattooed hand hovered over Maya's. With a grace that defied his reputation, he picked up the 2 copper coins. "The contract is sealed," Hyung said. He didn't smile. A smile would have been a lie. "Tell me, Rashiel, if that is your name, who are these men in gray?" Rashiel pulled Maya into her lap, her knuckles white as she gripped her daughter. "It's nothing you need to be concerned with, sir. She's just a child. She doesn't understand." "I understand debts," Hyung replied, tucking the coins into his vest pocket. "And I understand that a woman of your background, running a logistics firm in the heart of my territory, shouldn't be riding the subway at 2:00 a.m. unless her assets have been frozen. You are the widow of Jae-hoon, aren't you? The engineer who developed the Aegis tracking algorithm." Rashiel froze. The air in the car turned cold. "How do you know that?" "I know everything that moves in this city," Hyung said, standing up as the train slowed for his stop. "The men in gray aren't street thugs, are they? They are from the Baekdu group. They don't want your money. They want the encryption keys your husband left behind. They are trying to bully a widow and a child out of $1 billion legacy." The doors hissed open. Hyung stepped onto the platform, but he paused, looking back over his shoulder. Rashiel looked small in the oversized seat, her Afro-Korean daughter clinging to her. "The 2 cents have been paid," Hyung said. "Expect me tomorrow, and Rashiel, don't bother locking the door. If I wanted to hurt you, a lock wouldn't stop me. But since I'm on the payroll now, I suggest you make tea." As the train pulled away, Hyung stood on the platform, the neon signs of the city reflecting in his dark eyes. He felt the weight of the 2 cents in his pocket. It felt heavier than the briefcase of gold he'd received earlier that day. "Diho," Hyung muttered. "Yes, Chairman." "Find out which vice president at Baekdu Group signed the eviction notice for the widow in District 4, and find out what his favorite car is." "Are we going to destroy it, sir?" Hyung watched the tail lights of the train disappear into the tunnel. "No, we're going to buy the bank that holds his mortgage. I want him to know what it feels like to have the bad guys come for his home." The following morning, the sun rose over Seoul not with a glow, but with a harsh, clinical glare. In her small apartment, Rashiel sat at the kitchen table, a mountain of legal documents spread before her. She was a woman of 2 worlds, her mother's Kenyan resilience and her father's Korean discipline, but neither had prepared her for the predatory nature of corporate greed. Since Jae-hoon's death, the Baekdu Group had moved in like vultures. They claimed his patents belonged to the firm. They had used their influence to block her bank accounts, citing pending litigation. They were trying to starve her out. A knock at the door made her jump. It wasn't the heavy, rhythmic pounding of the debt collectors. It was a single, sharp rap. She opened the door to find Hyung. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket today. He wore a black silk shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms covered in intricate ink. He didn't wait to be invited. He walked in, his eyes scanning the room, landing on the stack of papers. "You're late," Maya chirped from the sofa, where she was coloring. "I had to go to the bank," Hyung said, glancing at the child before turning to Rashiel. "You're fighting them with law. That is your first mistake." "It's the only way," Rashiel snapped, her pride flaring. "I won't have you coming in here and breaking legs, Hyung. I know who you are. I won't have my daughter seeing that. I won't have her thinking violence is the answer." Hyung pulled out a chair and sat down, his presence making the kitchen feel half its size. "Violence is loud, messy, and temporary. I am not here to break legs, Rashiel. I am here to break their spirits. They are using the law as a weapon because they think you don't have the stomach to use it back." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black tablet. He slid it across the table. "While you were sleeping, I acquired the subsidiary that handles Baekdu's payroll. I found 3 discrepancies in their offshore accounts. In the underworld, we call this leverage. In your world, they call it an audit." Rashiel looked at the screen. Her eyes widened. This is enough to put their CEO in prison for 20 years. "Precisely," Hyung said, "but we aren't going to the police. Not yet, we are going to a meeting." "I have a court hearing at noon," Rashiel said, her voice trembling. "They're going to seize the apartment." "No," Hyung said, leaning back. "They are going to offer you a seat on their board, and they are going to apologize to your daughter for the misunderstanding." The phone on the table rang. It was the lead attorney for Baekdu. Rashiel answered it on speaker, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mrs. Park," the attorney's voice was slick, like oil on water. "We've decided to expedite the eviction. We'll be there at 1:00 p.m. with the marshals, unless, of course, you're ready to sign over the Aegis keys." Hyung reached out, his finger hovering over the phone. He looked at Rashiel, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded. Hyung spoke into the phone. "This is the new majority shareholder of your primary lending bank. You have 10 minutes to retract that statement, or I will trigger a margin call that will liquidate your firm by sunset. Do you recognize my voice, counselor?" There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end. Then the sound of a glass breaking. "Chairman Hyung, I didn't realize this was your business. It isn't my business, Hyung said, looking directly at Maya, who was watching him with wide, innocent eyes. It's my daughter's friend's business, and she's already paid me in full. He hung up. Rashiel stared at him, a mixture of awe and fear. Why are you doing this? 2 cents isn't enough to buy your soul, Hyung. I didn't do it for the money, Hyung said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I did it because your husband's algorithm is the only thing that can track the shipments my enemies are using to bring poison into this city. You want to save your home. I want to clean my streets. We are partners now, Rashiel, whether you like it or not. The tension in the city was palpable as Hyung's black sedan pulled up to a secluded laboratory on the outskirts of Incheon. This wasn't a corporate office. It was a graveyard of unfinished dreams. Jae-hoon worked here in secret, Rashiel said as they stepped out. Maya held Hyung's hand, a sight that would have sent shockwaves through the YHWI syndicate. The most feared man in Korea was being led through a dusty parking lot by a 5-year-old girl. Inside the lab, the air smelled of ozone and old paper. Hyung's men stood guard outside, their eyes scanning the perimeter for the gray suits who were undoubtedly following them. He knew they would try to steal it, Rashiel explained, walking to a heavy steel safe in the corner. The Aegis algorithm wasn't just for logistics. It was designed to detect ghost shipments vessels that turn off their transponders to smuggle illicit goods. Human trafficking, drugs, weapons. He wanted to make the ocean transparent. Hyung looked at the monitors. He spent his life navigating the shadows, but here was a man who had tried to turn on the lights. And the Baekdu group. They don't want to stop the smuggling, Rashiel said, her voice bitter. They want to control it. They want to sell the blind spots to the highest bidder. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. The hum of the air conditioning cut out, replaced by a haunting silence. "Di-ho," Hyung shouted, instinctively reaching for Maya and pulling her behind him. The windows of the lab shattered inward. Flashbang grenades detonated, filling the room with blinding white light and a deafening roar. Hyung didn't reach for a gun. He reached for the girl, shielding her body with his own. He felt the sting of glass cutting into his back, but he didn't flinch. Through the smoke, figures in tactical gear moved with surgical precision. These weren't corporate lawyers. These were mercenaries, the cleaners that the elite used when the law failed them. "Give us the drive, Chairman," a voice echoed through the haze. "You're out of your league. This is state-level technology. It doesn't belong to a street thug or a widow." Hyung felt a cold, familiar rage rising in his chest. He looked down at Maya. She was crying, her small hands clutching his shirt. Rashiel was on the floor, gasping for air, her hand reaching for her daughter. Hyung stood up. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like the monster the stories warned about. He pulled the 2 copper coins from his pocket and looked at them. "The contract," he whispered to Maya, "includes protection." He turned to the darkness, his eyes glowing with a predatory light. "You made a mistake," Hyung called out, his voice calm, which was far scarier than a scream. "You attacked a client of the YHWI, and you did it in front of a child." He reached into his belt and pulled out a small, high-frequency transmitter. He pressed a button. The ground began to shake. From the darkness outside, the roar of a dozen motorcycles and the heavy thud of SUVs drowned out the rain. Myriad red laser dots began to dance on the chests of the mercenaries. "I didn't bring my lawyers today," Hyung said as his men breached the doors. "I brought my family." The ensuing silence was more terrifying than the noise. The mercenaries realized they were surrounded not by police, but by the entire South Side army. Hyung walked over to Rashiel and helped her up. He then picked up Maya, who buried her face in his neck. "They're gone, Maya," he whispered, his voice surprisingly tender. "The bad guys are scared now." But as he looked at the drive in Rashiel's hand, he knew this was only the beginning. The Baekdu group had just declared war, and for the first time in his life, Hyung had something to lose besides his territory. He had a debt to a girl with 2 cents, and he intended to pay it back with interest. The air in the upper floors of the Baekdu Group headquarters was filtered, expensive, and smelled of desperation disguised as sandalwood. Hyung adjusted his cufflinks in the reflection of the glass elevator. He wasn't wearing his usual tactical black. He wore a charcoal gray three-piece suit that cost more than most people's annual salary. Beside him stood Rashiel. She looked transformed. Gone was the denim jacket. She wore a sharp, cream-colored power suit, her hair styled in a sophisticated, low bun. She carried a leather briefcase like a weapon. "Are you ready?" Hyung asked, his eyes fixed on the rising floor numbers. "I've spent 3 years being invisible to these people," Rashiel said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "Today, I want them to look me in the eye." "They won't just look," Hyung promised. "They will blink." The elevator doors chimed. As they stepped into the executive foyer, the receptionist stood up, ready to ask for credentials. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Hyung. Behind him, D-Ho and 3 other men stood like stone pillars. They didn't need to speak. Their presence was a physical weight. Hyung walked past the security desk without a glance. He kicked open the double mahogany doors of the main boardroom. Inside, 12 men in gray suits, the same men in gray Maya had described, sat around a table. At the head was Vice President Park, a man whose skin looked like parchment and whose heart was likely made of ledger entries. "What is the meaning of this?" Park stammered, his face flushing. "This is a private executive session." "It was," Hyung said, pulling out a chair for Rashiel at the center of the table. "Now, it's a collection agency. I believe you've met my business partner, Mrs. Rashiel, and I believe you owe her an apology for the mess you made in her husband's laboratory last night." The room went silent. The mention of the lab was a tactical strike. If they acknowledged it, they admitted to a crime. If they denied it, they looked weak. "We have no idea what you're talking about," Park sneered, regaining his composure. "And as for her husband's patents, they are legally the property of—" "Actually," Rashiel interrupted, sliding a folder across the table, "my husband's contract with Baekdu had a morality clause. If the firm engaged in activities that compromised the integrity of the technology, the patents reverted to his estate. Smuggling, Mr. Park, is a very clear violation." Hyung leaned over Park, his tattooed hand resting on the back of the man's chair. "I've spent the morning buying up your debt. Every bank that supports your logistics fleet now reports to me. You tried to steal a widow's legacy to hide your shipments. Now I own the ships, I own the docks, and I own the paper your house is built on." Hyung pulled out the 2 copper coins and placed them on the table in front of Park. "These represent the down payment for your downfall. You can sign the dissolution of the claim to the Aegis algorithm now, or you can watch your stock price hit 0 by lunch." Park looked at the coins, then at Hyung's cold, dead eyes. He realized then that he wasn't dealing with a businessman. He was dealing with a man who had nothing to lose and a child's promise to keep. Victory in the boardroom felt hollow when Hyung returned to his headquarters, a brutalist concrete fortress in the heart of the city. He found the atmosphere shifted. His inner circle, men who had bled with him to build the YLHWI, were whispering. "Chairman," D-Ho said, stepping into his office, "the elders are restless. They say you are wasting resources on a civilian matter. They say the Baekdu Group is a dangerous enemy to make over a few patents." Hyung stared out the window at the rain. "They think I'm soft because I'm protecting a child." "They think you've forgotten our purpose," D-Ho said quietly. "We are supposed to be invisible. Now, every news outlet is talking about the Mafia knight defending the Afro-Korean widow. It's bad for business." The betrayal came faster than Hyung expected, that evening. As he was leaving to check on Rashiel and Maya, his own car was targeted. Not by Baekdu, but by his own men, a faction led by Sangwoo, his ambitious second-in-command. The hit happened in a narrow alleyway. A garbage truck blocked the path and 3 black sedans boxed them in. Hyung didn't panic. He checked his watch. "D-Ho, I have a dinner appointment with a 5-year-old. Clear the way." The gunfight was short and brutal. Hyung moved with the fluidity of a dancer and the lethality of a viper. He didn't use a gun. He used a tactical knife, disabling his attackers with terrifying precision. When he reached Sangwoo, who was hiding behind a car door, Hyung didn't kill him. He grabbed the man by the throat and pinned him against the cold metal. You think my strength comes from fear. It comes from the fact that I finally have something worth fighting for. You took the elders' money to kill me. Tell them. The debt is cancelled, along with their lives. Hyung dropped Sangwoo and wiped his blade. He was covered in blood, his shirt ruined. He looked at his reflection in the car window. He looked like the monster he had always been. He realized he couldn't go to Rashiel's house like this. He couldn't let Maya see the price of her 2 cents. He sat on the curb in the rain, the 2 coins clinking in his pocket, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was caught between 2 lives, the one he was born into and the one a little girl had dared him to dream of. Rashiel found Hyung sitting on her doorstep an hour later. He had changed his clothes, but the scent of gunpowder and ozone still clung to him. He looked tired, a look she had never seen on the Iron Chairman. "They came for you, didn't they?" she asked softly, sitting down beside him. Maya was asleep inside, dreaming of teddy bears and coins. "My world doesn't like change, Rashiel," Hyung said. "By helping you, I've started a fire in my own house." "Then stop," Rashiel said. "We have the patents, we have the leverage, you've done enough. Take your 2 cents and go back to your shadows." Hyung looked at her. In the dim light of the hallway, he saw the strength in her. She wasn't a victim, she was a survivor who had been waiting for an ally. "I can't. If I stop now, they'll come for you twice as hard to get to me. The only way out is through." Together, they spent the night in the shadow play. Hyung used his underworld contacts to find where Baek-doo was hiding their most incriminating evidence, while Rashiel used her husband's algorithm to track the digital breadcrumbs of the syndicate's traitors. It was a perfect synergy, the Mafia's muscle and the engineer's mind. They realized that the Aegis algorithm wasn't just a tracking tool, it was a way to rebuild the city's infrastructure. If they could integrate it into the port systems, they could eliminate smuggling entirely, forcing the syndicate to either go legitimate or starve. "You're planning to destroy your own empire," Rashiel realized, looking at the code on her screen. "I'm planning to evolve it," Hyung corrected. "I want to build something Maya can be proud of, something that doesn't require a man like me to protect it." As the sun began to peek over the horizon, they had a plan. They would bait the Baek-doo group and the syndicate elders into a final meeting at the docks, the graveyard of ships. It was a gamble that could cost them everything, but as Hyung looked at the sleeping Maya through the cracked door, he knew he wasn't playing for money. He was playing for a future. "One more day," Hyung said. "One more day," Rashiel echoed, her hand momentarily resting on his. For the first time, the touch didn't feel like a contract. It felt like a beginning. The air in the city felt like a bowstring pulled too tight. The paper war had escalated into a silent, cold vacuum where the usual street noise of District 4 had been replaced by a watchful, heavy stillness. But inside Rashiel's apartment, there was the smell of vanilla and the sound of a small girl laughing. It was Maya's 6th birthday. Hyung stood in the center of the small living room, looking entirely out of place. He had traded his tactical gear for a simple black sweater, yet he still carried the aura of a man who could command a storm. In his hand was a gift wrapped in silver paper, tied with a clumsy, oversized bow. "You actually came," Rashiel said, wiping her hands on an apron as she emerged from the kitchen. She looked at him with a softness that bypassed his defenses. "I didn't think a man in your position had time for cake." "A contract is a contract," Hyung replied, though his eyes weren't on the documents he usually carried. They were on Maya, who was currently trying to put a party hat on Deho's head. The hardened bodyguard sat perfectly still, looking terrified of the 5-year-old's floral-patterned hat. For 3 hours, the underworld didn't exist. There were no men in gray, no treacherous elders, and no looming corporate collapses. Hyung watched as Maya blew out her candles, her face glowing with a pure, unadulterated joy that he hadn't seen in 30 years. "What did you wish for?" Hyung asked as Maya handed him a plate with a dangerously large slice of cake. I wish that the bad guys would stay away forever, Maya said, her eyes bright, and that you could stay for dinner every night. The room went quiet. Rashiel caught Hyung's eye, and for a moment the Mafia boss and the widow weren't allies of convenience. They were two people standing on the edge of a life they both desperately wanted but feared they didn't deserve. Hyung knelt down so he was eye level with the girl. He reached into his pocket, not for a weapon but for a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was a necklace with a tiny gold coin pendant. On the back, in elegant Korean and English script, was the word Aegis. This is a special key, Maya, Hyung said quietly. It represents the 2 cents you gave me. As long as you wear this, the bad guys can't see you. You'll be invisible to them, but you'll always be seen by me. As the evening wound down, Rashiel walked Hyung to the door. You're giving her a lot to live up to, Hyung. That necklace. It's the master hardware key for the algorithm, isn't it? Hyung nodded. The safest place for the heart of the empire is around the neck of the only person who doesn't want to use it for power. Tomorrow, we finish this. Tomorrow, I pay back the 2 cents with interest. He stepped into the hallway, the shadow of the chairman returning to his shoulders. He knew that the piece of the birthday party was the eye of the hurricane. The elders had mobilized, and the Baekdu group had hired a private militia. The graveyard of ships was waiting. The Incheon docks were a skeletal landscape of rusted cranes and towering shipping containers. The graveyard of ships earned its name tonight. The fog was so thick it swallowed the beams of the flashlights. Vice President Park stood at the center of a cleared circle, flanked by 20 mercenaries in high-end tactical gear. Opposite him were the syndicate elders, men with white hair and hearts of cold stone, led by the traitor Sangwoo. They had formed an unholy alliance, corporate greed meeting traditional crime to eliminate the man who threatened both their status quos. He's late, Park hissed, checking his watch. If Hyung doesn't show, we proceed with the forced transfer of the Aegis servers. He'll show, Sangwoo growled. He's developed a weakness. He's playing hero for a woman and a brat. A low hum began to vibrate through the concrete. From the fog, a single pair of headlights appeared. Hyung's sedan pulled to a stop. He stepped out alone. No Deho, no army, just a man in a black coat carrying a single leather portfolio. Where is the girl? Park demanded. And the mother. We need the biometric signatures to unlock the final phase of the algorithm. Hyung walked into the center of the circle, seemingly unfazed by the 30 rifles pointed at his heart. They are safe, far beyond the reach of men who think a signature is more powerful than a debt. You're a fool, Hyung, one of the elders spat. You've destroyed our traditions for a whim. Give us the keys and we might let you live in exile. Hyung opened the portfolio. He pulled out a document, but it wasn't a transfer of power. It was a dissolution of the YLHWI syndicate. I'm not here to negotiate, Hyung said. I'm here to tell you that the Aegis algorithm is already live. It's been running for the last hour, and it hasn't been looking for smugglers. Park's phone buzzed, then the mercenaries' phones, then the elders. What is this? Park screamed, looking at his screen. Our offshore accounts. They're being drained to a Kenyan Korean education fund. The algorithm tracks ghost movements, Hyung explained, his voice like falling ice. It doesn't just track ships, it tracks the ghost of money. Every bribe you've ever paid, every cent you've stolen from the widows and orphans of this city, it's being redirected. By the time the sun rises, the Baekdu group will be a shell, and the YLHWI will have no payroll to satisfy its soldiers. Kill him, Sangwoo roared. But the mercenaries didn't move. They were looking at their phones. Their digital wallets were flashing red. The bad guys were being defeated by the very thing they tried to steal. Suddenly, a massive spotlight cut through the fog. Not from the police, but from a fleet of logistics trucks, hundreds of them, bearing the logo of Rashiel's new company. The workers, the drivers, the people who had been oppressed by the syndicate and Baekdu stepped out. They didn't have guns, they had cameras and live streams. The world is watching now, Hyung said, stepping back as the police sirens finally wailed in the distance. I didn't need to scare you with a gun, Park. I just needed to show everyone who you really are. As the police moved in to arrest the disgraced executives and the traitorous mobsters, Hyung stood in the shadows. He had kept his promise. The bad guys were terrified. 6 months later, the Seoul skyline was changing. The old neon signs of the syndicate's front companies were gone, replaced by the sleek, vibrant branding of Aegis Logistics. At the top of the city's newest eco-friendly skyscraper, a wedding was taking place. It wasn't the typical Mafia wedding of movies. There were no bodyguards with earpieces at the altar and no tension in the pews. It was a celebration of a new era. Rashiel stood at the end of the aisle in a gown that shimmered like the sea. Beside her, Maya, now the youngest board member in the city's history, held a basket of flower petals. Hyung stood at the altar. The tattoos on his neck were still there, a reminder of where he had come from, but his eyes were different. The coldness had been replaced by a quiet, steady light. He was no longer a boss. He was a husband, a father, and the CEO of a company that was cleaning up the very streets he once ruled. As they exchanged vows, the ceremony wasn't just a union of two people. It was the formal merger of two worlds. The Afro-Korean community and the established Korean business world watched as they joined hands, creating a legacy that was built on integrity rather than fear. During the reception, as the sun set over the Han River, Maya ran up to Hyung and pulled on his sleeve. "Is the debt finished now?" she asked, looking up at him. Hyung picked her up, settling her on his hip. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the 2 copper coins, now encased in a small, clear acrylic cube. "No, Maya," Hyung said, looking at Rashiel, who was walking toward them with a smile that lit up the room. "A debt of 2 cents is a lifetime contract. I think I'll be paying it back for the rest of my life." The story didn't end with a rescue or a savior arc. It ended with a transformation. The Mafia boss didn't save the black woman. They saved the city together. And as the music played and the family danced, the 2 cents sat on the head table, a reminder that the smallest amount of courage can change the destiny of an empire. The bad guys were gone. The good guys had finally learned how to win. If you love this story, hit the subscribe button and also stay tuned for more.